Budget choices are often described in terms of the sustainability of debts, but they're really about the sustainability of people's livelihoods. People know that spending only on the present won't deliver a better future for them and their children. And so once we exit COVID, we will need broad-based growth driven by investments in the digital and sustainable engines of our future, and policies that support the full participation of all Canadians in our economy. In other words, a sustainable recovery isn't a slogan. It's what the next generation deserves, and it's what we need right now. When faced with huge challenges, it's tempting to deny they're real. It's seductive to delay what needs to get done. But if we delay and deny, change will be something that happens to us, and it will hit the most vulnerable Canadians the hardest. That's not how we built the best country in the world. We don't deny our problems. We defeat them. We build our tomorrow. Now, when someone starts talking about our successes, Canadians often begin to get uncomfortable, because after all, humility is a core Canadian value. Humility means planning for things that can go wrong, like financial crises and pandemics. It means setting ambitious goals, knowing that we need to work together to achieve them. Humility means never being satisfied with all that we've achieved, but knowing that by staying true to our values, we can build an even better country for everyone. And to me, humility means recognizing the great good fortune that I've had growing up and the responsibility of service that comes with that. And that's why I'll do whatever I can to support the Liberal Party in our efforts to build a better future for Canadians. Merci de m'avoir invité ce soir.
Markets don't have values, but people do. How does a former Bank of Canada governor come to that conclusion?
Well, a central bank governor that lives through a series of crises. As you may recall, I became Bank Canada governor literally at the start of the global financial crisis. In the last half hour of my term as a Bank of England governor was the COVID crisis had begun, and we put in place a series of emergency measures with others at that point. So I lived through a series of crises, and part of the question was, well, what is driving the crisis? Is there a common root? And my judgment has been that part of it was an imbalance between the value of the market and the values of society. And we can go into that in more detail if you wish. But more positively, what we have seen with COVID by the reactions of Canadians, supportive Canadians, as I mentioned at the outset, of each other, has been these fundamental values of solidarity, of compassion, of fairness, responsibility. And that gives hope, because that creates the ability to build a better society. When we know what we value at the core, we can put the market in the service of those values. And that's very much what we are starting to do. We have much more work to do on it, but we're starting to do with respect to climate change.
How did you arrive at those tenets? You talked about humility. You just mentioned solidarity and fairness. The others, there's 7 of them in your book, are responsibility, resilience, sustainability, dynamism. It must have been difficult to fit all that you were thinking based on all of your experience into 7 buckets.
Well, there's 2 things. First, humility was easy to arrive at. If you make a series of mistakes over your life, you discover that humility is an important value. And if you live through a series of crises, you realize that in many cases, a little more humility of authorities, masters of the universe in finance, others would have helped avoid the situation if you think about what could go wrong and responsibility to protect it. But the core answer to your question is, I sat down and set out the question for myself, which was your first question. In effect, is there some common root to these series of crises? What is it about them? What had I learned? And I arrived at those values sort of through reflection on those crises, and very importantly, our responses to them and what worked. So in the response to the financial crisis, much less an issue for Canada, to the credit of the Canadian financial system and Canadians by extension. But internationally, the importance of responsibility and reinstilling responsibility and a sense of solidarity. In other words, in that case, a sense of responsibility for the system as well as yourself, not just for your own institution, a sense of solidarity if you're running a bank with the ultimate clients you have, peoples, said another way, and communities. And what are you giving back, and how does your purpose actually serve to bring them along as well? And so the answer is it's revealed through human experience. And the most difficult, you learn a lot about people. We've learned a lot about ourselves during this period of this difficult period of COVID. And much of what we see is to credit, and that which we don't like, we need to address.
Let's talk a little bit more about that, because here we're living through a pandemic. Climate change, obviously, is on the radar in a big, big way. Systemic racism, economic disparity, all of these things. Do we need a complete reset?
I think not. I wouldn't use that term, not least because we need to build on the core values that we have and reinforce them. So, for example, we just talked about the solidarity shown through the crisis, the sense of compassion. In parallel, though, we have seen in Canada the inequalities that still exist in our society, and in fact, those inequalities have been deepened. Certain groups are more likely to lose their jobs. They're much more likely to be infected with this terrible disease, and much more likely to have worse health outcomes when they are infected with the disease. This goes to the heart of how do we bring everyone to the same level? How do we take full responsibility for each other? So I don't view that as a reset, but as a reaffirmation of our core Canadian values and living up to them. And it's one of the things that I love about this country, which is not being satisfied, always having a sense of we need to make greater progress, and progress in the broad sense of it, progress across the society, not measured by a GDP number or a dollar figure, but progress. And we look in the mirror and we recognize there's more. Much has been done, but much more needs to be done. And I think that's we can take both the good and the challenge of COVID as we move forward.
Not a reset, but a reaffirmation. Want to talk more about COVID and what I like to call the COVID pause, because this pandemic has taught us so much, Mark, many lessons. You mentioned some of them. Who has fallen through the cracks? How can we help? How can we build back better? What can we do? Who's hurting? Family, values, all of those things. Give us some insight into your world and how you've been living and how you've been dealing with this and the lessons that you've learned.
Yeah, I'm very much one of the fortunate ones in this pandemic, in that how I've been living is largely in this room. I've taken to sleeping at the office effectively because this is where I do my work and my writing and my conversations like this, which is a privilege. I'm not on the front lines. I'm not out there exposed. And I recognize that. I recognize with that comes a responsibility to do what I can to support those who are. That's the first. I also recognize I'm very fortunate in that all of our family is not together, but our youngest children are here. We have the family, the regular family meals, and the tightness that and the better understanding that comes with that. And you wonder why. I wonder why I didn't have that all the way through, and regret that I didn't have it, but cherish it now that I have. But I, like others, have a parent who